There we go. What's up, y'all? My name is Travis Handler. I am the chair for Doane Leadership Educators. We're here with another episode of On the Way Up. I am here with Jeremy Hardy, who is the Training and Technical Assistance Manager at Men Can Stop Rape. Jeremy, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Travis.
So just to start off real easy, can you kind of just give me your, a snapshot of your background, where you grew up, at stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. My parents were both elementary school teachers. My dad taught music and my mother taught first and third grade at different points. And my sister and I actually both attended that school where they taught. And I think that whole experience of, our neighborhood in Ditmas Park and the Brooklyn New School really shaped who we became in a lot of ways. The learning experience there was really hands-on, very actively involved in, learning about the world and the community and sort of what we could do to be a part of it. It was not very test-based in that way, if that makes sense. And so I think that was a central part of my upbringing, but other components too were I played soccer from the age 4 up. And I also played music, piano, drums, guitar, whatever was sitting around, and joined a band in high school. And so those are some of the formative things that shaped who I am in my childhood. I don't know how much, how depth you want me to go.
That's perfect. And so I guess, and I kind of heard you allude to having a passion for learning and education. Would you say that and we'll get to Men Can Stop Rape, but would you say that experiences in your childhood like that are what drove you to do some of this prevention education work?
I think, it's funny that you mentioned, about education specifically, because seeing my parents be teachers, and elementary school teachers, right? That there's different, experiences across the learning environments. And I always was like, I'm never going to be a teacher. They work so hard. That looks like it's tiring. And I find myself drawn to teaching because it is one of the best ways to learn, in my experience, in my opinion. And so over the years, I have gradually shifted from, I don't know if I want to teach. I don't think I'll ever want to do that, to being like, I think I want to teach. I think that's what I want to do. And so in that way, it's informed my prevention education and work right now. But I would say the thing that activated me to really get into the prevention and gender-based violence space was my college experiences.
So now, just the inherent follow-up question, why? What about your college experiences drove you to do that?
Yeah, so I, as an undergrad, joined or attended a speak out that some students organized, some young women on Goucher's campus. I went to Goucher College in Towson, Maryland, shout out. And they organized a speak out to alert the community of, the prevalence of sexual assault in the community. And they had some survivor stories shared on the loudspeakers in that event. And it just totally activated me. I was in my sophomore year, and prior to that semester, I would have told you that sexual assault and sexual violence was something that happened elsewhere. That was not in my life. I watched all those episodes of Law and Order SVU, and it never really, seeped in that this was a real thing that happened in the real world. And that speak out made it real for me. So when I went to ask how I could sort of help, I worked with several people on campus, including fellow students who taught me a lot about gender and about sexual assault, and helped sort of coach me and mentor me into being a presenter. So I created a presentation that year that I gave to student athletes that led to joining the campus climate research team, the Goucher Peer Listeners, and creating a group on campus that was dedicated to talking about healthy masculinity. And so it was just this sort of process of learning and moving into an awareness of how masculinity impacts human behavior. And to me, what was so mobilizing about it was that I had always felt masculinity's presence in my life, but I had never really learned to articulate it and talk about it and begin to develop my own relationship with it. I can respond to, I can resist, I can reshape what these things look like. And so that was all very activating to me, and I really appreciated it. So Men Can Stop Rape has been just a wonderful outgrowth of being able to do that. And I was very fortunate, as I was talking about sexual assault and masculinity as a college student, that there was a nonprofit that existed that talked specifically about those things. So
Well, I mean, that's a perfect segue into, can you just kind of describe what Men Can Stop Rape does, what the objective of the group is, etc.?
Yeah, so Men Can Stop Rape is a national nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. We were founded in 1997 when a group of guys came together and were paying attention to the women's movement and the issue of violence against women and wondering how they could help out. What were the things that they could do? And they thought, well, we could speak to other men about this and we might be credible messengers to other men as men. And if we're going to do that and talk to men about violence against women, then we're going to need to focus on masculinity. We're going to have to talk about the messages that boys and men receive about what it means to be a man. And if that's the starting place of relationships between men and women, then it only had the opportunity to grow outside of that. And that has been our focus for the past 25 years. And so we do our work in three main areas. One is youth development. So we have two youth development programs, the Men of Strength Club and the Women Inspiring Strength and Empowerment Club. We've been running those in middle schools, high schools, and college campuses ever since our executive director, Neil Irvin, joined Men Can Stop Rape in 2001. He was then the director of youth development. And I'll talk more about those programs in a little bit. We also do training and technical assistance, and that's where my role lies. So a lot of that is working with other professionals, communities, you know, leaders, individuals, anybody who wants to learn about our approach to healthy masculinity and primary prevention. That's what our training and TA department is focused on, you know, educating and training others about. And then we also do public education. And so that has existed in the forms of the My Strength Is Not for Hurting campaign and the Where Do You Stand campaign. And I can talk more about those as well. But those are just a few areas that are sort of the main elements of our work, but we also have a number of other projects, you know, relationships and networks where our work exists as well.
Absolutely. And so one of the references you made a moment ago, and we'll transition to talking about, is the Men of Strength Club. And that was something I found on your website that really interests me. So can you talk about the purpose of this program, and then B, why teaching healthy masculinity, especially at a young age, having exposure to that is so important to healthy relationships and to, you know, lessening sexual assault?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Men of Strength Club in many ways actualizes on our mission as an organization, which is to mobilize boys and men to use their strength for creating cultures free from violence. And in many ways, that is investing in the primary prevention efforts of having these boys and men learn about healthy masculinity from the get-go, and be able to use healthy masculinity to prevent violence against women and other forms of violence. And so that curriculum for the Men of Strength Club, which is based around a full year of engagement, where we're going into the schools and we're having weekly meetings, lunchtime clubs, after school clubs, summer programs as well, that are all building on raising the awareness, the skills, and the abilities of these boys and young men around healthy masculinity through our framework of dominant stories and counter stories. There are dominant stories and counter stories of everything. When we talk about masculinity, those dominant stories are the pervasive ones around what it means to be a man. That is, being stoic, emotionally unexpressive, except if you have the masculinity insurance to do so. That is, you know, being muscular, being tattooed, being, you know, any version of a real man, what society thinks of as a real man that exists. And so the harm in that story is where it leaves no room for alternative. And is in the way that it creates a less than, better than dynamic, a hierarchy as the orientation for relationships in boys and men and in others who, you know, also perpetuate the norms of dominant stories of masculinity. So the counter story is our approach to getting to healthy masculinity. What is it that healthy masculinity looks like? We believe that healthy masculinity exists in all areas of human activity, and that boys and men inherently have an understanding of these things. I mean, yeah, I'm interested in the psychology of all this, and I really, you know, love to lift up Carol Gilligan's work and Terrence Real's work when they talk about. Judy Chu has some about this too. The impact of this dominant story of masculinity on boys and men happens when they're like 3 to 5 years old, where they learn the rules of masculinity and are beginning to perform them as a way of interacting with one another. And you can see at that age, boys really have an innate understanding of relationships, really attuned, really articulate, direct. It's really profound. And you see some of these stories start to shape and mold their behavior out of their relational selves. And so for us, healthy masculinity is an opportunity to get back into that, and to be inherently relational, the inherently relational selves that we are. And so there's that benefit to healthy masculinity, but in particular, in how it relates to preventing violence against women, we also see that under the dominant story, the ideas around violence, how it plays out, what it looks like, and the different factors that shape its incidence. So in our view, what shapes human personality is nature and nurture and environment. And so there are some ways that you are, naturally going to be. There's the nurturing that you receive in your home where you grow up. And then there's the environments that shape who you are, your friend circles, that includes your closest friends, that includes the structure of, teams, organizations, and groups that you're a part of, the different learning institutions that you are in, the city or the state or the location where you grow up. All that stuff plays into shaping who you are. So when we're looking at why violence against women exists, we see a real through line in those dominant stories of unhealthy masculinity playing into the behaviors of violence. And so, in our mind, being advocates for youth and for boys and men specifically, we want to know what happened to you that you thought it was okay to hurt somebody in a relationship. What is it that impacted you, that led you to believe in this orientation towards relationships that is hierarchical, that is less than or better than, that to act out your anger, frustrations, feelings in the form of violence against other people? And so we really feel like if masculinity is shaping those behaviors and those things, in the dominant story, then we really need to bring in the counter story as a way of not only preventing them, but also solving some of those problems, helping people heal from the, very harmful impacts of the dominant story. And so that's a long roundabout way of going about it. But that's a little bit about how masculinity plays into preventing violence against women.
No, that was fantastic, and I think an incredibly comprehensive breakdown. And so, just returning to one of the things that one of the themes, obviously, of this interview series is, and this might be a little bit redundant based on what you just explained, but why is healthy masculinity important to being a good male leader?
Well, it's in many ways, the answer to good leadership, especially for boys and men. And part of the reason that is one, because of how healthy masculinity creates the opportunity for different kinds of leadership, different kinds of masculinity. I love this quote as well. Our executive director Neil Irvin said this in the Men of Strength Club, where one of my colleagues, Grillen Thomas, who's also a trainer, technical assistance program manager for Men Can Stop Rape. In that club, Neil said there are as many kinds of masculinity as there are men in the room. And Grillen offers the addendum today of there are as many kinds of masculinity as there are people in the room. And so that speaks to the evolution of their decade plus relationship and the wisdom and the understanding of, people's lives happen at the intersections and they are different. Everybody is unique while we have some commonalities and some through lines, some ways that we do connect as a herd species. So if you're going to talk about leadership, that means meeting people where they are. That means being able to work with people in a relational sense. People are not computers that you can put to work and have grind out in their jobs all day long. We have needs and lives, and those include aspirations, hopes, and dreams, things that interest us, that are potential career opportunities and potential ways to spend our lives in order to earn a salary and live your life economically. But there's more to it than that. So if we want to talk about being a good leader, it means being able to tap into the values of healthy masculinity that are, able to embrace vulnerability where that's appropriate, able to lead with empathy in moments that that's appropriate, and also learning to assert and take up your authority as a leader in a way that is also appropriate. That's not stomping all over everybody else, and is aware of the boundaries that exist in a particular environment. And we see that, as a former student athlete, we see a lot of that, great examples of it in athletics and in sport. And so, when we look at how a coach is going to shape the behavior of young people that they are coaching, it's one of the reasons that, the standard for excellence is so high. And yet, off the field, there can be time for those relationship building, one-on-one meetings and conversations that meet those young people where they are and invest in their emotional skills and their emotional intelligence. And so I'm losing my thread here, but ultimately going towards, there's a way that healthy masculinity gets you closer to the relational side of leadership that we really want to lift up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny because my next question is going to be about inclusion, but I actually think that you touched on it pretty well there. But I'll still proffer this to you. And again, my apologies if this is going to be a little bit redundant. Why is inclusion important to the work that y'all do?
Well, so one of the reasons that it's important is, in the way that we want healthy masculinity to be a plurality, that there's masculinities that exists across the different forms of identity when it comes to race, when it comes to, age, when it comes to gender, sexual orientation, you name it. The experience of being a particular identity is not uniform. It exists in many different facets and different iterations. The performance of your different identities is going to look different and is going to evolve for you over your life. That's one of the reasons, human beings are so complex. It's a constant, unlearning, relearning, shaping, trying out, performing, and being something that is closer to the idea of who you are. And so when we talk about inclusion, we want everybody's wisdom and expertise to be involved. It's one of the reasons that we like to use storytelling as a central part of our work. We ask people to share meaningful stories. It's not only investing in the practice of, emotional intelligence, but also getting the chance to reflect on and learn from your own story and hear those of your peers around you, from the leaders in your community, and so on. It changes hearts and minds. It has the capacity to do that. And so when we're thinking about, being inclusive, we're really wanting to, what are the best ways to be inclusive to others? How can we, invest in our knowledge and use of language as a way of doing that, but also create space for those different kinds of experiences and those different stories, especially when we're wanting to have conversations that are difficult and are asking people to confront violence or engage with conflicting parts of themselves and differing perspectives that may, in many moments, jut up against each other. So, to us, there's just, there's no way that we can do our work without involving others. And yet that is not at the expense of our primary mission of serving and working with boys and men specifically. That will always have a need in our work, in our language.
Thank you. And well, actually, this is a question I meant to ask earlier, but why is the model, the peer-to-peer model of having men teach men so effective, or at least why is that kind of y'all's MO with Men Can Stop Rape?
So, our work exists as an organization really as an outgrowth of and because of all the foundation laying and work that the women's movement and the feminist movement over the last 100 years has taken place. So we're able to work with boys and men and talk about preventing gender-based violence, power-based violence, violence in general, because of that. And at the same time, we believed in and talk about credible messengers. And, in order to go into a community, there are certain ways in which my identity, who I look like on the outside, how I present in the world is going to automatically make me a credible messenger to a given community. And there's also how my experiences shape into that. So as an example, I feel very authorized to talk to student athletes. I know what it's like to be a student athlete. I have lessons to learn from the Division I, Division II athletes who were playing at a higher level than I was in Division III. And at the same time, being able to have that understanding of their experiences going into it makes it easier for me to just step into a way of relating to them, meeting them where they are. There are stereotypes that exist about athletes, and there are truths behind those stereotypes, and there are also counterpoints that subvert those stereotypes. And so we want to be able to let people know we see the complexity of your experience. And in doing so, we're building relationships, we're building trust, and we're investing in the idea that they can be a resource and a change agent, and that they are seen as part of the solution. And that doesn't mean that only men can work with other men, as is evidenced by the women's movement. Women have been saying the same things for a long time that we are saying today. And we really believe, that to become a credible messenger, like I said, with automatically, you don't need to already start out in that community, but to show an interest in their lived experience and to invest in the idea that this is a person who has value, who has self-esteem. These are people who are doing something that's worth paying attention to and investing in, are all ways of signaling that I would like to be in relationship with you. And this is part of when we talk about becoming a credible messenger that we are also going to explore more with our new training that we're building on facilitators training. It's specific for people who work in running groups and programs for youth or violence prevention or other areas as well. So there's a lot more I could say about it, but credible messengers is something we really like to lift up.
No, absolutely, and thank you. That was a fantastic answer, and that actually gives us the perfect transition. You made a reference to the feminist movement. Can you talk a little bit about, and admittedly, I didn't put the acronym down here, but I've got it
Wise?
as the WISE Club. Yeah.
Yeah, the Women Inspiring Strength and Empowerment. So this is going to dovetail with what we call community strength projects. So in 2010 at Banneker High School, there was a Men of Strength Club meeting happening. And many times during the year, most club will have open meetings. Most club members will invite their peers to sit in, participate. They'll have open discussions. And back to inclusion, this is a place where, while it's important to have a space just for boys and men to talk about masculinity, it is just as important that we have a space for interdisciplinary, intersectional conversations with multiple different identities and perspectives present. So the girls and young women who were joining those open meetings appreciated the conversations, liked the space, and said, we want one too. And so to date, the greatest community strength project that the Men of Strength Club undertook was helping and working with those girls and young women to create the Women Inspiring Strength and Empowerment Club. So if the Men of Strength Club is teaching dominant and counter stories about what it means to be a man, then the Women Inspiring Strength and Empowerment Club is doing the same thing for girls and women. And in doing so, we are bringing our approach to meeting young people where they are, to talking about dominant and counter stories, to the conversations that are going to look different and flow differently for girls and young women in the same exact spaces where boys and men are. And that's enabled us to create a curriculum that is modeled off of the Most Club, but is its own standalone WISE Club curriculum, and is a program that we've been running since 2010.
Awesome. And I mean, that's a perfect transition then to why is this medium of the community strength, why is that so effective, and integral to the work that y'all do?
Well, we really like to lift up, the grassroots organizations and movements that have existed over time. And one of the practices of primary prevention that follows our process of behavioral or environmental change, we can't just raise their awareness and teach them about things and then that's it, right? We need to mobilize. We're trying to mobilize them into the community. And so once we opened up the Pandora's box and the young people see the misogyny or the sexism or the power imbalances in their own classrooms, in their own homes, in their own friendship circles, and in the movies and all once they start to see it, they become activated. Oh my goodness, like now I want to do something about it. The same thing happened for me when I attended that speak out at Goucher. And so the Community Strength Project is a way to take their interests and their developing awareness and journey, lifelong journey of learning, and put it into something that they can contribute to the community. So it's an election year, and we have a bunch of 17-year-olds who are going to turn 18 before the election. Let's set up a voter registration drive so that those can get empowered to vote when it's time. If at the very least, even if they choose not to vote, we can put in front of them that it's easy to be registered, and here's what we're going to do. There are all kinds of other ways that community strength projects have taken shape. And part of that, has to do with our Easy Gaming group, the e-sports league that we created with most and wise clubs across schools in DC, trying to invest in the connection there to STEM and education and learning that is in that field and area. This has to do with, the young people putting on film screenings and hosting and, talking about them in their own environments. And also most notably, the Counter Stories teen docuseries that Most and Wise Club members put on, where they had frank conversations, hosted those conversations, interviewed each other and other leaders in talking about these ideas that we have discussed with them in the clubs. And so those community strength projects are a way of integrating what they've learned and putting it into the community. So I'll go back to the process for behavioral change. Now that they've raised their awareness, they're moving into action. And once they move into action, what does that look like? We help them with that process. And then afterwards, we come back and, say, how did it go? What did we learn from this? How did it feel to be involved in the community in this way? And we're going to begin to repeat. And let's do this again next year. Let's do it in these different ways or do it the exact same way. And then we'll want to revise and sustain. Once we've figured out, okay, it kind of could be improved in these ways, and it was really strong, successful in these ways, we want to make sure that it's always being fine-tuned and continuing to evolve. And these are experiences, life-shaping experiences that at the high school, middle school, and college level are building up their resumes and building up their abilities to continue to do these things at a larger scale in the different areas of their lives, whether they become, Capitol Hill police or, their own business owners, or join us at Men Can Stop Rape, or do whatever it is that they are going to do. So that's a lot about community strength projects, but
no, that was fantastic. And one of the questions I kind of immediately thought of with, projects of this scale, what are the difficulties that the particular challenges that this work poses?
Yeah. So one of the main difficulties, I think, is in the strange way that our work is about empowerment and problem posing. Like we're trying to do two things at once. We're trying to alert people, the community, and when we're thinking about youth development as well, there are a multitude of things that go into wanting to support the development of young people. And so when we're exposing an issue to them that they may be aware of, that they may have experienced, that they may not be aware of, and that they may have, like me, never thought was in the real world, we're asking them to look at a really difficult problem: violence. They know it exists, and they're deeply attuned to it in many ways, and have real insights and stories to share that are also teaching others, their peers, about violence. And at the same time that we're looking at the problem and trying to raise an awareness of it in all its iterations, because there's a continuums within continuums of what violence can look like, from the overt physical, verbal sexual abuse that can happen, and also the different scale of harms that can exist on systematic levels, in institutional policies, and in human behavior, suggesting in everyday ways that there are, less than, better than dynamics. At the same time that we're looking at these problems, we're also trying to empower to be part of the solution. So now that you're aware of the problem, what do you do about it? And this is one of the things that I run into in my role a lot, this is all nice and great to talk about masculinity. And in fact, I'm really glad we're talking about it. I've wanted to talk about it for a long time and have never really had the space to do so. But how do I actually prevent sexual assault? How do I actually prevent rape? What does that look like? Well, there's the ways that we can talk about bystander intervention and learning to see and identify problems, situations that could lead to sexual violence or other forms of violence and intervening on those. And that takes a skill set. Bystander intervention is difficult. To say something when something is wrong is difficult. You put yourself at risk of going against your group's social norms that are very compelling. We know that social norms are very compelling. So there's that skill set that we're wanting to develop and build. But there's also the general awareness that goes into things that may not rise to the level of bystander intervention, but are part of relationship building, that are part of meeting people where they are and getting to know who people's authentic selves are. And so in that way, we're wanting to prepare people to intervene in a moment that's harmful, but also to be investing in the pro-social environment that we're trying to say you can create. So when you see harm that's taking place, it may not be your role, or it may not be in your abilities in that particular moment to do something that is, bystander intervention-esque. But it may be possible for you to check in with somebody afterwards and say, hey, I noticed when so-and-so made that off-color comment that rubbed me the wrong way. I wanted to ask how you felt about it because it was directed towards you. Are you doing okay? Signaling that you see a reality of hierarchies, especially ones that are reflected by a gender lens, is a way of practicing primary intervention. Offering the opportunity for pro-social norms, healthy relationships, talking about, what it's like to be in a relationship and the challenges that couples go through, as an example, or that the trials and tribulations that friendships go through. All those things are raising the awareness of and normalizing the lifelong learning process of creating a pro-social environment. So those are also places where we want to invest our knowledge, skills, and abilities of young people, the trainers that we work with, the professionals that we work with across industries. And we want to lift up that as much as it is important to provide crisis intervention services and help people who are in desperate need, who need assistance and support right away, legal support, counseling, whatever. We also want to be sort of going upstream, as we call it, earlier on in the timeline of human behavior, and be able to not only confront, harmful attitudes, behaviors, and assumptions and language, but also offer the normal role that healthy communities can play and that can exist, and really invest in things that are pro-social, invest in the love that exists in people's lives. We need more of that. We just need more of that, especially in this moment. So I'm on a tangent now, but
No, that was fantastic, and that actually leads me perfectly into the next question, which is what sort of skills, leadership or otherwise, does your role and just prevention education work in general necessitate of those who are doing the work?
yeah, so one, I think there's got to be a commitment to, the cause and the issue. This is not a field to work in if you're trying to, make the most money in the world and make your way to the top of the economic chain, right? There's got to be a way that you're invested in the work. So that's one area. And I would say, as just an aside to that, often in this work, people are compelled to be a part of it because of their own personal connection to the issue. And that may be they know somebody who's experienced violence, that may be that they have themselves. But in many ways, it's also, I notice that this structure of harm, that this, the prevalence of this kind of harm in all its different iterations exists. And I have been nurtured and socialized and encouraged in my different environments to, in some way or another, help out and be part of the solution. And so there's that commitment that comes forward. And I would also say, in that personal connection that they may have. This is one of the benefits, I think, of working in the prevention space, is that what we do professionally also informs our personal lives. So we're helping to change hearts and minds, to shape human behavior and offer alternatives to harmful constructs that people may not realize they're playing into, or have a very strong attachment to, or whatever your relationship to the dominant story is. But that's something that I really appreciate, is getting to learn lessons from people in community about violence that is teaching us about relationships. The flip side of looking at violence is looking at healthy relationships. And so there's a lot of lessons to be learned that are, I feel like my relationships in my own individual life has benefited from. So that's one, I think, criterion. You've got to be invested in it and see the value. And I'll pause there. I'm not sure what else you may need besides that.
No, I mean, that's absolutely perfect. And hearing you discuss, especially the importance of understanding good, interpersonal relationships and how integral that is to your work, it makes sense that it helps in your own life with your own relationships. So let's see. Sorry, I jumped ahead of myself a little bit. So speaking to the technical assistance piece of what you do, the website boasts of pretty big organizations that y'all have worked with, and I'll flex for you for a moment because I know you wouldn't otherwise. CDC, the White House, the NBA, the NFL, MLB, MLS, the NCAA, the UN, amongst a myriad of other organizations. But and again, that this might be redundant, but I still think it's worth highlighting. Why is it important for large organizations? So we'll take the NFL for a perfect example. Why is it important that the NFL in particular has some sort of basis of prevention work like this?
Well, one area that I like to lift up about this is, the presence and the impact that sport has in, a global context. I'm a soccer fan, so, when it comes to global sports, it doesn't get any more global than soccer. And I'm going to tie this into football, I promise. When I'm watching international soccer games, or club games from leagues all around the world, in Europe and Africa and here in the US and at other places too, and I remember seeing a red hash on players' faces during a Juventus game, a Serie A in Italy, and I was like, what's that? And on the global stage, athletes are signaling and doing things all the time when they take off their shirt after scoring, in whatever form they may score, or in wearing a particular T-shirt. When we see kneeling during the national anthem, there's all kinds of ways of signaling to the world something that you care about, and using the stage of athletics to do so. The red mark that I saw was a domestic violence awareness campaign. That soccer players, just by wearing a red mark on their face, just having a bit of paint there, are able to let everybody else know this is an issue that we're taking a stand to raise awareness about. And it's a simple way of doing so that, I think for athletes in particular, if you're tasked with, like, put the red mark on your face, and you may not necessarily know much about domestic violence, it's a way of saying, if I'm going to run around the field with this thing on my face, then maybe I should learn a little bit about it. If I'm going to earn the income that a professional athlete does, maybe I should find ways to invest that income or reinvest it into the community and give back in some ways that I can do that. So there's all these learning opportunities that are in front of professional athletes in that way. And so when we think about, something like the National Football League, it's in the same thing, where they have an opportunity to be leaders in this issue. That doesn't mean that means that the NFL has to be perfect in all of its iterations, and all of its, team structures, and all the ways that you can critique and look at what the NFL is. We as an organization try to lift up athletics as a resource, that we want to shift the narrative from athletes being part of the usual suspects to the usual allies. And I think that this is particularly true with athletic teams as well. The team culture, just like with the military, the tone starts at the top. And so that team culture is shaped by the leadership of the coach, and coaches, assistant coaches, as well as the captains and the sort of informal leaders of a particular team. And so it's very easy for that team dynamic then to be shifted in one direction or another, in terms of the extremes of it, right? And just like with, there are as many kinds of masculinity as there are people in the room, there are many experiences of being a football player as there are football teammates on that particular team. And so we want to find out, what are the lessons that you all learn in athletics and in sport? What are the things that you experience and go through, the challenges to your mental health, the relationship building and the closeness and intimacy that's present in your locker rooms and in your conversations, on the way back from practice, and the ways in which your skill set in being part of something that is larger than yourself and having to take the authority to help win games and compete. Those are all lessons that can be derived from sport and are useful for prevention work. And so we really want to invest in and see the resource that sports and sports organizations can be. And so, our work with those different entities is just an example of that. And, honestly, I'd just love to see more of it. I think that there are a lot of ways that organizations across the globe are doing important work and raising awareness in those particular ways. And it can be subtle. It can be as simple as wearing a t-shirt when you're on the bench during a game, or as overt as making videos and hosting trainings and all those good things that are community-based and are investing in a particular community. So I'll pause there because there's a lot I could say about why we love sport and the resource of it.
No, I think that was fantastic. And one of the things I really loved, and you were able to kind of steal my thunder with the next question, which is going to be why it's important to have leaders and spaces engage in this work. But I think that the example that you made, that the idea that the top of the organization determines the direction of everything beneath it, I think is super important. And so pivoting just a little bit now, if you could go back and before you started this work, if you were talking to Jeremy of 5, 10,
this is good.
years ago, what piece of advice would you give yourself before launching into this work? What's something that you wish you had known?
I think that there are a lot of things. But one of the things that I have appreciated most about working at Men Can Stop Rape, and from the leaders who are part of our organization, that they have taught me individually, has to do with, holding on to the balance between confronting masculinity and wanting to change it, and also honoring and loving it. And I think, this happened in my very first interview with Neil Irvin. I had spent a lot of my time in college, trying to change the culture of masculinity. And I was very much looking at sexual assault, at consent, at all the issues from a sort of deficit-minded perspective. I was wanting to look at the harm. I was wanting to look at the problem. I was wanting to talk about it. I was wanting to tell everybody, guys, masculinity it's a problem. I wanted to be the wet dog in that situation, sort of get everybody else wet. I did not really learn the strength-based approach that Men Can Stop Rape offers until I got to the organization, and that it's really possible to love men and masculinity and also be able to confront and change it when it's harmful and is, contributing to dehumanizing other people. And if I could offer some morsel to communicate that to, the version of me that was 10 or 15 years ago, he would not have been able to hear it. He would have been like, what is masculinity? But that's something that I wish I could have had more practice with and more awareness around when I was beginning to do this work. Just because you are becoming an activist and just because you care about this issue and want to do the right thing doesn't mean that you can't be a man anymore. It doesn't mean that you can't be who you have been socialized to be. There's just an opportunity to improve. And I just think that there's a different way that I've learned love at Men Can Stop Rape than I did as a college student, than I did from my family and friends. And that's just a product of doing this work. And like I said before, the way that our professional work influences and informs our personal relationships has really just, in many ways, I think, accentuated how my personal life is able to grow from just doing this work. So that's different than somebody who's an accountant and their physical health is set because they know, right? So there's all kinds of professions that inform your personal life, but this is just an example of how this one informs mine.
Fantastic. Um, and so just to wrap up here, I wanted to give you a second to talk a little bit about what's on the horizon for Men Can Stop Rape. What's next for y'all in the coming year or two?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. It's as if you're wanting to set me up to hit some home runs here. So, next year we're celebrating our 25th anniversary as an organization. And I think for us, it's a particularly exciting opportunity, not just because we've been able to pivot and continue our work through, the pandemic, but also it speaks to the way that we are living out the value of this being sustained work, and it requiring it to be sustained work. One of the things I wanted to add after one of your questions a few minutes ago was about the work of primary prevention, that it requires dosage and it requires touches and it takes time. We can't just tell people violence against women is a problem and we need to solve it. If we could just tell people what to do and they would just do it. I like when Neil Irvin says this, that if it worked that way, then we would do it for world peace. We wouldn't just do it for sexual assault, right? And so I don't need everybody in the world to become, a lifelong activist that invests 100% of their time in preventing sexual assault, gender-based violence, other forms of violence. And yet, if there are markers and touches that raise the awareness of the issue for people, that offer solutions for people to be a part of, and create environments where it's not only normal to talk about these issues, but also a part of the community's social norms to be actively involved in preventing and counteracting them, then we're really doing our job by allowing primary prevention to have its different touches and doses from a lot of different places that are in the media, that are in music, that are in the sports that we watch, that are in the environments we're in, whether it be a classroom or a workplace, that are in the friendships that we form and that are in our own, pursuit of our dreams. And so, what's next is the vision for what the next 25 years of Men Can Stop Rape is going to look like. We've sustained our work in the last, 2+ decades and are going to continue to do so. And I just am excited about, how the organization is going to grow. There's a lot that we do that the name Men Can Stop Rape doesn't speak to very specifically. That indicates quite a bit about what we do. And yet, as I'm talking about primary prevention and relationship building and, consent, and what it means to be a man, there are a lot of areas where our work is going to continue to explore and grow. And so I'm just excited for what that's going to look like.
Awesome. Thank you so much. With that, we'll wrap up unless you've got anything else. I want to thank you first and foremost for being here, taking the time to speak with me again. This is Jeremy Hardy, training and technical assistance manager at Men Can Stop Rape. This was On the Way Up. Jeremy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Travis. I appreciate it. Good to see you, brother.
Good to see you too.